The tiny apartment felt even smaller, with two grown men living in it. The younger brother stood at the window, watching rain trickle down the glass while morning light struggled to break through the clouds. 3 weeks had passed since he'd moved in, and still he felt like an unwelcome guest in his older brother's home. Behind him, his brother finished his coffee with a swift gulp and adjusted his bow tie. The famous conductor was already dressed for the day in his crisp black suit, hair neatly combed, shoes polished to a mirror shine. "I'll be home late. The orchestra has extra rehearsals this week," the conductor said, not looking up as he gathered his sheet music into a leather folder. "Remember the house rules?" The younger brother nodded, though he knew the rules by heart after hearing them every day since he'd arrived. Don't touch the thermostat. Don't rearrange anything, and above all else, don't touch the piano. The grand piano dominated the living room like a sleeping giant. Black and glossy, it seemed to absorb all the light that fell upon it. The conductor treated it with more care and attention than he had ever shown his own brother. As the front door closed, the younger brother let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Alone at last, he moved to the kitchen, made himself a simple breakfast, and tried to ignore the pull of the forbidden instrument. Life hadn't been kind to him lately. The factory where he'd worked for 8 years had closed without warning. His tiny studio apartment had followed soon after, the rent impossible without steady income. Pride shattered, he'd called his only family, the brother he barely spoke to, the musical prodigy who had left their small town decades ago for concert halls and worldwide acclaim. "Just until I get back on my feet," he had promised when his brother reluctantly agreed to the arrangement. Now he spent his days applying for jobs, making dinner as a peace offering, and trying to be invisible in a space that his brother had crafted for solitude. The conductor had made it clear that this living situation was temporary, a favor that should inspire gratitude, not comfort. After finishing his breakfast, the younger brother washed his dishes and returned them to their exact spots in the cabinet. He moved through the apartment quietly, as if the floor might break under normal footsteps. As he passed the piano, his hand instinctively reached out, stopping just inches from the polished wood. He'd never had music lessons. Their parents couldn't afford 2 children in music programs, and the older brother had shown such promise from an early age. By the time the conductor was 12, he was already performing in regional competitions. By 16, he had earned a scholarship to a prestigious music academy in the city. The younger brother had been left behind, told to pursue practical interests. Yet music had always lived inside him too, unnamed and untaught. He hummed while he worked, tapped rhythms on any available surface, and sometimes woke from dreams where his fingers danced across keys he had never been trained to play. The piano seemed to whisper to him now. Just one touch, it seemed to say. What harm could it do? But he pulled his hand away. His brother's rage wasn't worth the momentary satisfaction. Instead, he grabbed his coat and headed out to another job interview, this one at a warehouse across town. The interview went poorly. "We're looking for someone with specific experience," the manager said, though the younger brother had worked in similar positions for years. He suspected his age was the real issue. Too old to be cheap labor, too young to retire. Rain soaked him on the walk home, his umbrella having surrendered to a gust of wind. By the time he reached the apartment, his shoes squeaked on the hardwood floors, and his spirits had sunk to match the gray day outside. He changed into dry clothes and began preparing dinner, hoping that a home-cooked meal might soften his brother's perpetual disapproval. As the soup simmered on the stove, he found himself once again standing before the piano. In the empty apartment, with the gentle sound of rain as background, he finally allowed himself to sit on the bench. Just sitting, he told himself, not touching. The bench felt cool and smooth beneath him. He positioned his hands above the keys, imagining what it would feel like to press them down, to release the music that must be hiding inside this magnificent instrument. His phone rang, breaking the spell. It was his brother. "The rehearsal is running late. Don't wait up," the conductor said, his voice clipped. "I made soup," the younger brother replied. "Put it in the fridge. I'll have it tomorrow." The call ended without a goodbye. The younger brother ate alone, as he did most nights. After washing his dishes, he settled on the couch with a book, but his eyes kept drifting to the piano. With his brother's late night, he would be alone for hours yet. Just one note, he thought. just to know how it feels. Before he could change his mind, he returned to the bench and with a gentle pressure, pressed down a single key. The note rang out clear and bright, hanging in the air like a question. He pressed another key and another, finding that each one spoke with its own voice. Without thinking about what he was doing, his fingers began to find patterns. Not songs exactly, but something like music, raw and untrained but filled with feeling. He played softly at first, then with growing confidence as the apartment filled with sound. Time disappeared. He didn't notice the rain stopping or the moon rising. He played from some deep well of emotion, years of unspoken feelings finding their way through his fingertips. Sometimes he hit wrong notes, creating dissonance that made him wince, but even those moments felt right somehow, part of the journey. He didn't hear the key in the lock. Didn't notice his brother standing in the doorway, face darkening like a thundercloud. "What are you doing?" The conductor's voice crashed through the apartment. "Don't touch my piano, poor brother." The younger brother leapt from the bench as if burned, nearly stumbling in his haste. You were just nothing. Do you have any idea what your untrained hands could do to this instrument? This isn't some toy to amuse yourself with." The conductor stalked forward, his tall frame seeming to fill the room. "This piano is worth more than everything you've ever owned." The younger brother felt heat rising in his face. "I didn't damage anything. I was careful." "Careful? You don't even know what careful means with an instrument like this." The conductor ran his hands over the piano as if checking a child for injuries. "These keys respond to the slightest touch. The action is precisely calibrated. Your ham-fisted pounding could throw the entire thing off balance." "I wasn't pounding on it," the younger brother said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was playing." The conductor laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. "Playing? Is that what you call it?" That random noise wasn't music. It was the sound of someone who never bothered to learn. Someone who thinks they can just sit down and create art without discipline or training. Each word landed like a physical blow. The younger brother stood silent, absorbing the familiar pain of his brother's disdain. "I opened my home to you," the conductor continued. "And this is how you repay me? By deliberately disobeying the one rule I was absolutely clear about?" "I'm sorry," the younger brother said, though part of him wasn't sorry at all. For those brief moments at the piano, he had felt something awakening inside him, something genuine and alive. "Sorry doesn't tune a piano," the conductor snapped. "Just go to your room. I can't even look at you right now." Like a scolded child, the younger brother retreated to the small guest room that had become his temporary shelter. He closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, his hands still tingling from the memory of the keys beneath them. He should have felt ashamed, but instead, he felt something unexpected stirring in his chest. Something that felt suspiciously like rebellion. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he had touched something beautiful and brought forth sound from silence. His brother could yell. He could threaten. He could even throw him out. But he couldn't take away those moments when the music had flowed from somewhere deep inside, when the barrier between imagination and reality had momentarily dissolved. The younger brother lay back on his bed and closed his eyes, replaying the notes in his mind. His brother was right about one thing. He didn't know what he was doing. But what he lacked in training, he made up for in raw feeling. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start with. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find another way to play. Because now that he had awakened the music inside him, he knew with absolute certainty that he could never go back to silence again. Morning arrived with uncomfortable silence. The younger brother woke to the sounds of his brother preparing for another day of rehearsals. He stayed in bed until he heard the front door close, then ventured out into the living room. The piano sat there, seemingly innocent in the morning light but now charged with new meaning. He made himself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching people hurry down the street below. Each person had a purpose, somewhere to be. He took another sip, bitter warmth spreading through his chest, and thought about last night. The feeling of the keys under his fingers, the way the music had seemed to flow from some unknown place inside him, and then his brother's face twisted with rage and disappointment. "Don't touch my piano, poor brother." The words echoed in his mind, stinging just as much in memory as they had in the moment. He set his mug down and approached the piano cautiously as if it might sound an alarm. Instead of sitting, he just ran his fingertips lightly over the closed lid. Even this small touch felt like defiance. His phone buzzed with a text. Another rejection from yesterday's job application. We've decided to go with other candidates whose experience better matches our needs. The same polite brush-off he'd received a dozen times now. The younger brother sighed and grabbed his coat. He couldn't stay in the apartment all day staring at the piano he wasn't allowed to touch. The city library was free, warm, and had computers he could use for his job search. On his way out, he paused at the door and looked back at the grand piano. "I'll find a way," he whispered, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant. The library was quiet except for the gentle clicking of keyboards and occasional whispers. After 2 hours of sending resumes and cover letters into the digital void, the younger brother needed a break. He wandered through the stacks, fingers trailing along book spines, until he found himself in the music section. He pulled out a beginner's piano book and flipped through it. The notes on the page looked like a foreign language, black dots and lines that somehow translated to sound. He tucked the book under his arm and found a few more. If he couldn't practice on a real piano, at least he could learn something about how music worked. The librarian smiled as she checked out the books. "Taking up piano?" "Trying to," he admitted, "though I don't actually have one to practice on." "You know," she said, stamping the due date. "There's a public piano in the park 3 blocks south. One of those painted ones the city put in last summer. It's not in great shape, but it's free." His heart leapt. "Really? Is it? I mean, can anyone use it?" "That's the point," she said, handing him the stack of books. "Music should belong to everyone, not just people who can afford lessons and expensive instruments." He thanked her and headed straight for the park, books clutched to his chest. The day had warmed up and people filled the green space. Dog walkers, mothers with strollers, office workers eating lunch on benches. In a corner near the fountain stood a brightly painted upright piano. Its colors faded from sun and rain but still cheerful against the greenery. The younger brother approached it slowly, almost expecting someone to stop him. A sign on the piano read, "Play Me," in bold letters. He set his books down on the bench and lifted the lid to reveal keys that had seen better days. Some yellowed, one chipped at the edge. He sat down, painfully aware of people nearby who might hear his amateur attempts. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hands on the keys and began to play, trying to remember the patterns his fingers had found last night. The sound was nothing like his brother's grand piano. This one was out of tune, with some keys that stuck and others that rang too loud. Yet there was something charming about its imperfection. He played softly at first, then with more confidence as he realized that no one was paying much attention to him. An elderly man stopped to listen, nodding appreciatively before moving on. A young couple paused their walk, the woman leaning her head on her partner's shoulder as they enjoyed the impromptu performance. Their small gestures of approval gave him courage. The younger brother lost track of time, experimenting with different combinations of notes, occasionally consulting one of his library books when he hit a roadblock. The outdoor piano became his classroom, the park his conservatory. He returned the next day and the day after that. Each session taught him something new. Sometimes he would watch videos on his phone of piano tutorials, then immediately try to mimic what he'd seen. Other times he would simply play what felt right, following the music that seemed to already exist inside his head. One rainy afternoon, forced back to his brother's apartment, he sat at the kitchen table with his books spread out before him. He practiced finger positions on the tabletop, his hands dancing over the fake wood grain as if it were ivory and ebony. His brother came home early, pausing in the doorway to watch this curious pantomime. "What are you doing?" the conductor asked, his voice more confused than angry. The younger brother jumped, hands freezing mid-motion. "Nothing, just thinking." His brother hung up his coat and loosened his bow tie. It didn't look like nothing. "I've been teaching myself about music," the younger brother admitted. "There's a piano in the park." The conductor's eyebrows rose. "The painted one? That thing is a wreck. It works well enough." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. The conductor filled a glass with water and drank it slowly, watching his brother over the rim. "Show me what you've been learning," he said finally. The younger brother's stomach tightened. "What? Show me." "On the table. Whatever you were doing when I came in." Heart pounding, the younger brother positioned his hands again and began to move them in the patterns he'd been practicing. His fingers tapped silently on the tabletop, his body swaying slightly as he imagined the music. The conductor watched with an unreadable expression. When the younger brother finished, the apartment felt too quiet. "That's interesting," the conductor said. He seemed about to say more, then shook his head. "I have papers to review." He retreated to his study, closing the door firmly behind him. The younger brother sat motionless, unsure whether to feel encouraged or dismissed. At least there had been no shouting this time. 2 weeks passed in this uneasy truce. The younger brother continued his daily visits to the park piano, steadily improving. He found a job stocking shelves at a small grocery store. Not great pay, but enough to start saving for his own place again. Each night he practiced silently on tabletops and armrests while his brother pretended not to notice. Then came the storm. Rain pounded the city for 3 days straight, keeping the younger brother away from his beloved park piano. By the third evening, he felt like a caged animal, fingers itching to play real keys instead of imaginary ones. His brother had been particularly tense that week, snapping at small inconveniences and staying later at rehearsals. The symphony's big performance was approaching, some challenging new piece that had the entire orchestra on edge. When the conductor finally came home that night, he looked exhausted. He dropped his leather folder on the coffee table and sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "Bad day?" the younger brother ventured. The conductor grunted in response. "The pianist is struggling with the third movement. We've run it 20 times and it still sounds mechanical." He closed his eyes. 2 weeks until the performance, and our soloist can't connect with the emotional core of the piece. The younger brother nodded sympathetically, though he didn't fully understand the problem. He made tea and brought his brother a cup. "A peace offering of sorts?" "Thank you," the conductor said, sounding surprised by the gesture. They sat in rare, companionable silence, sipping tea and listening to the rain against the windows. The storm was finally beginning to ease, moonlight occasionally breaking through the clouds. "I'm going to bed," the conductor announced eventually. "Early rehearsal tomorrow." He paused at the hallway. "I'll be gone all day. The apartment is yours." Something in his tone made the younger brother look up sharply, but the conductor's face revealed nothing as he turned away. After his brother's bedroom door closed, the younger brother sat very still, hardly daring to believe what he thought he'd heard in those words. An invitation? Permission? Or just a statement of fact? He couldn't sleep that night, his mind filled with possibilities. When morning came and his brother left without further comment, the younger brother stood before the grand piano, heart racing. The bench felt different now, not forbidden but sacred. He sat down slowly and raised the fallboard to reveal the pristine keys beneath. Taking a deep breath, he began to play. The sound was magnificent. Every note rang true. Every chord resonated with perfect harmony. The instrument responded to his touch like a living thing, sensitive to the slightest pressure of his fingers. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. The younger brother played everything he had learned on the park piano, marveling at how much better it sounded on this finely tuned instrument. Then he ventured beyond, exploring new melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. When he finally stopped, his fingers aching pleasantly, the apartment was bathed in afternoon light. He carefully closed the fallboard and stood up, feeling as if something fundamental had shifted in his world. Whatever came next, his brother's reaction, his own uncertain future, he had crossed a threshold. The music inside him had found its voice, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The younger brother was washing dishes when he heard keys in the lock. His hands froze mid-scrub, water dripping onto the clean plates below. Had he remembered to close the piano lid? Had he left any evidence of his day-long musical exploration? The conductor entered, his face drawn with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally perfect posture had given way to a slight slouch. "How was rehearsal?" the younger brother asked, trying to sound casual as he dried his hands on a dish towel. The conductor dropped his leather folder on the table with unusual carelessness. "Terrible. Our pianist called in sick. Says he has the flu." He loosened his tie with an angry tug. 2 weeks before the performance, and he decides to get sick. "That's unfortunate," the younger brother offered, unsure what response was expected. The conductor walked to the kitchen cabinet and pulled out a glass. "Unfortunate doesn't begin to cover it. This piece requires technical precision and emotional depth. Our backup pianist can handle the notes, but she makes it sound like a mathematical equation. He filled the glass with water and drank deeply. I need a musician, not a human metronome. The younger brother nodded sympathetically, relief washing over him as he noticed the piano appeared untouched, just as he had left it. His brother hadn't mentioned it, which meant either he hadn't noticed it had been played or, more intriguing, he had noticed and chosen not to say anything. I made pasta, the younger brother said, gesturing to the covered pot on the stove. Nothing fancy, but it's hot. To his surprise, the conductor accepted the offer with a nod. They ate together at the small kitchen table, an unusual occurrence that highlighted the strangeness of the day. The director suggested postponing. The conductor said after several minutes of silence, as if that's an option. The hall is booked solid for the next 6 months. We'd lose our deposit, not to mention our credibility. He stabbed at a piece of pasta. We'll just have to make do with what we have. The younger brother felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Behind his brother's frustration, he sensed genuine passion for the music, something they apparently shared, though in vastly different ways. Maybe your regular pianist will recover quickly, he suggested. The conductor's laugh was short and humorless. The doctor says he'll be contagious for at least 10 days. Even if he recovers in time for the performance, he'll have missed critical rehearsals. He set down his fork. Enough about my problems. Did you find a job yet? The younger brother blinked at the sudden interest in his life. Yes, actually. Stocking shelves at the grocery store on Maple Street. Night shift, so I'll be out of your hair most evenings. Good. The conductor seemed about to say more, then stood abruptly. Thank you for dinner. I need to review some notes. He retreated to his study, leaving his half-eaten meal behind. The younger brother cleaned up, puzzling over his brother's unusual behavior. Perhaps the stress of the upcoming performance was forcing a temporary truce between them. Or maybe their shared meal represented something more, a tentative bridge across years of distance. That night he lay awake thinking about his brother's predicament. The image of the orchestra without its pianist kept circling in his mind. What would happen if no suitable replacement could be found? All that preparation, all that passion, wasted. An absurd thought struck him just before sleep claimed him. What if he offered to help? The idea was so ridiculous that he almost laughed aloud in the darkness of his room. His brother would sooner cancel the performance entirely than let his untrained younger sibling near a professional piano concert. The next morning, the conductor left early again. Another full day of rehearsals, he muttered on his way out. Don't wait up. Alone in the apartment, the younger brother felt drawn to the piano like a magnet. This time he approached it without hesitation or guilt. Sitting at the bench felt like coming home after a long journey. He placed his fingers on the keys and closed his eyes, letting the music flow through him. Today he tried something different, playing with his eyes shut, focusing entirely on the sounds and sensations. Without visual distractions, he found himself more attuned to the subtle variations in pressure and timing that shaped each note. Hours passed unnoticed. He played everything he knew, then began experimenting with new patterns and progressions. Sometimes he hit dissonant combinations that made him wince, but other times he discovered beautiful harmonies that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. A knock at the door startled him back to reality. He closed the piano lid hastily and crossed the room, wondering who could be visiting. An elderly man with kind eyes and a white beard stood in the hallway. Hello, he said, his voice warm and slightly accented. I live downstairs. I hope I'm not interrupting. No, not at all, the younger brother replied, though his heart raced. Had the man heard him playing? Would he complain to his brother? I heard the piano, the man said, confirming his fears. It's been many years since I've heard music from this apartment. Your brother usually practices at the concert hall. I'm sorry if it disturbed you, the younger brother began, but the man waved away his apology. Disturb? No, it was lovely. Different from the technical exercises your brother does when he rarely plays at home. Your music has, how do you say it, heart. The younger brother stared at the man, speechless with surprise. I was a piano tuner before I retired, the man continued. I know a little about music. He tilted his head. May I come in? Just for a moment. Still stunned, the younger brother stepped aside to let him enter. The man walked directly to the piano. his gaze appreciative as he ran a gentle hand over its polished surface. Beautiful instrument. Top quality. Your brother has excellent taste. He turned to face the younger brother. But the most beautiful piano in the world is nothing without the right hands to bring it to life. I'm not trained, the younger brother admitted. I've just been playing around, the man smiled. Some of the greatest musicians in history were self-taught. Technique can be learned, but soul, he tapped his chest. Soul must be born inside you. My brother wouldn't agree. He thinks music requires discipline, years of study. Your brother is not wrong, the man conceded. But he is not completely right either. The best music comes from both, technical skill and emotional truth. He gestured to the piano. Would you play something for me? The request left the younger brother flustered. Playing alone was one thing. Performing for someone else, especially someone knowledgeable about music, was terrifying. I don't really know any proper songs, he said hesitantly. Play whatever you were playing when I knocked. It sounded like you were having a conversation with the piano. Taking a deep breath, the younger brother sat at the bench and positioned his hands over the keys. The old man's presence made him acutely self-conscious, but as soon as he began to play, the music transported him back to that private world where nothing existed but sound and feeling. When he finished, the apartment seemed unusually quiet. He looked up to find the old man watching him with an expression of gentle wonder. You have a gift, the man said simply. Unpolished, yes, but genuine. I would be honored to help you develop it if you wish. Help me? How? I may be retired, but I still know a thing or two about piano, and I have plenty of time. He extended his hand. I live in apartment 2B. Come see me tomorrow afternoon if you're interested. After the man left, the younger brother stood motionless, trying to process what had just happened. A retired piano tuner had offered to teach him. Him, the untalented brother who had never been given a chance. When his brother returned that evening, the younger brother said nothing about his visitor. The conductor was in no mood for conversation anyway, muttering about incompetent substitutes and impossible deadlines as he heated up leftover pasta. Days passed in a new routine. The younger brother worked night shifts at the grocery store, slept late into the morning, and spent his afternoons in apartment 2B, learning from the old piano tuner. The man was patient but demanding, teaching him basic music theory and proper hand positions, while encouraging him to maintain the emotional connection that made his playing special. Your technique needs work, the old man would say, but your instincts are good. Trust them. Most importantly, the old man taught him to play with his eyes closed. The greatest pianists don't watch their hands, he explained. They feel the keyboard as an extension of themselves. When you close your eyes, you open your ears. In the evenings before work, when his brother was still at rehearsals, the younger brother would practice on the grand piano, applying what he had learned. Each day brought noticeable improvement. His fingers moved with greater precision, his timing grew more consistent, and the music itself became richer and more complex. Meanwhile, his brother's mood darkened as the performance date approached. The substitute pianist was adequate but uninspiring, and the conductor came home each night more frustrated than before. The director suggested we simplify some passages, he complained one evening, as if butchering the composition is the solution. This piece deserves to be played as written, with technical perfection and emotional depth. The younger brother listened sympathetically, an idea forming in his mind. It was crazy, probably impossible, but it refused to go away. That night, after his brother fell asleep, he slipped out of the apartment and knocked softly on the door of 2B. The old piano tuner answered in a bathrobe. Surprised by the late visit? I need to learn something specific, the younger brother said, his voice urgent. My brother's orchestra is performing a piece in 2 weeks. Their pianist is sick. I want to learn the piano part. The old man's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. That's ambitious. I know it's probably impossible, but I have to try. He held up his phone. I have a recording of the piece. The piano enters about 2 minutes in. The piano tuner studied him for a long moment, then smiled slowly. Well, he said, opening his door wider, we'd better get started then. Learning a complex orchestral piece in less than 2 weeks was madness. The younger brother knew this, yet he couldn't stop trying. Every free moment was devoted to practice, first with the old piano tuner, then alone on his brother's grand piano when the conductor was out. The piece was unlike anything he'd attempted before. Pages of intricate notes, tempo changes, and dynamic markings that might as well have been written in a foreign language. The old man from apartment 2B did his best to translate, teaching him to read just enough musical notation to follow along. "This section here," the old man would say, pointing to a particularly dense passage, "requires lightness in the right hand while the left hand provides the foundation." Like a dancer on solid ground, the younger brother would try, his fingers stumbling over each other as he attempted to coordinate movements that felt unnatural and strained. "Too mechanical," the old man would say. "Close your eyes. Feel the music, don't just play the notes." With his eyes shut, the younger brother found a different kind of understanding. The patterns began to make sense not as symbols on a page, but as waves of sound that rose and fell in natural rhythms. He still made plenty of mistakes, but now they were creative mistakes, the errors of someone exploring rather than merely executing. At home, he practiced silently on tabletops when his brother was present and furiously on the actual piano when alone. The conductor remained oblivious, too consumed with his professional crisis to notice the subtle changes in his younger brother. The calluses forming on his fingertips, the way he hummed complex melodies while cooking dinner, the light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. 1 week before the performance, disaster struck. The conductor came home and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. "That's it," he announced to the empty living room, not realizing his brother was in the kitchen. "Our pianist just officially withdrew. Doctor's orders, no performing for at least a month." He threw his leather folder onto the couch. "The backup refuses to play the solo. Says it's too difficult with so little preparation time." The younger brother stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, a half-dried plate in his hands. "What will you do?" The conductor startled slightly, then sighed. "The director is calling every pianist in the city. So far, no one is available or willing to tackle this piece on such short notice." He sank onto the couch, looking defeated for the first time in his brother's memory. "We might have to cancel." "Cancel? After all that work? What choice do we have? We can't perform without a pianist. This isn't some simple accompaniment, it's a featured role. The entire piece falls apart without it." The younger brother set down the plate, heart pounding. The words he wanted to say felt stuck in his throat. How could he possibly suggest what he was thinking? His brother would laugh him out of the apartment. "What about—" he began, then lost his nerve. The conductor looked up, distracted. "What about what?" "Nothing. It's a stupid idea. At this point, I'd consider anything short of having a monkey play the piano." The conductor ran a hand through his usually perfect hair, leaving it uncharacteristically disheveled. The younger brother took a deep breath. "What about me?" For a moment, the words seemed to hang in the air between them, uncomprehended. Then the conductor's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You?" He didn't even try to hide his incredulity. "You've never had a lesson in your life." "That's not exactly true anymore," the younger brother said quietly. "I've been learning with the man downstairs, the retired piano tuner, and I've been practicing your piece." The conductor stared at him. "My piece? The concerto we're performing next week?" The younger brother nodded. "That's absurd. Professional pianists spend months preparing for a performance like this. Years developing the technical skills required. You can't possibly, and I know," the younger brother cut in. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've been working on it every day. I might not be perfect, but I could at least help with rehearsals until you find someone better." The conductor's laugh held no humor. "This isn't some simple tune you can pick up by ear. This is a complex, technically demanding piece that requires—" "Just let me show you," the younger brother interrupted again, surprising himself with his boldness. "Just once. Let me play for you, and if it's terrible, we'll never speak of it again." The conductor looked ready to refuse, then sighed in resignation. "Fine, show me what you've learned." "It can't possibly be worse than today's rehearsal." Heart racing, the younger brother approached the piano. His hands were trembling as he lifted the fallboard. This was what he'd been working toward. Yet now that the moment had arrived, fear threatened to overwhelm him. What if he failed completely? What if his brother's dismissal was justified? The conductor sat in his armchair, arms crossed, expression skeptical. "I'll start from the piano entrance in the first movement," the younger brother said, positioning his hands. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began to play. The first few measures were shaky, his fingers stumbling over notes he'd played correctly 100 times in practice. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he pushed through, focusing on what the old piano tuner had taught him. Feel the music. Don't just play it. Gradually, his hands steadied. The familiar patterns emerged, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought faltered. He forgot his brother was watching, forgot his own limitations, and surrendered to the music itself. The piece was about struggle and triumph. That much he'd understood from the first time he'd heard it. His own struggle became part of the performance, his imperfect technique transformed by genuine emotion. Where his fingers couldn't move fast enough, he found simpler ways to express the same musical idea. Where complex chords challenged his untrained hands, he focused on capturing their essence rather than their exact notes. When he reached the end of the first movement, he stopped, breathing hard as if he'd run a great distance. Only then did he open his eyes and dare to look at his brother. The conductor sat motionless, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. The conductor began, then paused, seeming to search for the right words. Not what I expected. The younger brother waited, bracing himself for criticism. You made technical errors, the conductor continued. Many of them. Your tempo was inconsistent. Your left hand missed several important bass notes. He stood up and walked to the piano. And yet there was something there. Something I haven't heard in any of our rehearsals so far. The conductor tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the piano lid. You played with your eyes closed. The piano tuner taught me. He says it helps me feel the music better. The conductor nodded slowly. He's not wrong. He seemed to be wrestling with some internal decision. Finally, he sighed. You're not ready. Not for a performance of this caliber. The younger brother's heart sank, though the assessment was hardly surprising. But, the conductor continued, perhaps with intensive coaching, we have 1 week. Hope flickered like a small flame. You mean? I'm desperate enough to try something unprecedented. If, and this is a significant if, you can improve enough in the next 7 days, I might consider letting you play at the rehearsals. The performance itself is another matter entirely. You'd coach me? The younger brother could hardly believe what he was hearing. Not just me. I'll bring in our musical director and the composer himself if necessary. This would require extraordinary measures. The conductor fixed him with a stern look. An extraordinary commitment from you. No grocery store shifts, no distractions. Every waking hour would be dedicated to preparation. I'll do whatever it takes, the younger brother promised, his voice firm despite the flutter of panic in his chest. What had he gotten himself into? The conductor checked his watch. I need to make some calls. Be ready to work tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. He headed toward his study, then paused. One more thing, yes? When did you start playing my piano regularly? And don't bother denying it. The key action feels different. Someone has been playing it and not just occasionally. The younger brother hesitated, then admitted. Since that day you said you'd be gone all day, I thought maybe you were giving me permission. A small smile flickered across the conductor's face. Perhaps I was. He disappeared into his study, closing the door behind him. Left alone, the younger brother stared at the piano keys, overwhelmed by what had just transpired. His wild, impossible idea had somehow become reality. His brother, the musical prodigy, the perfectionist conductor, had agreed to help him prepare for a professional performance. He gently closed the fallboard and went to call his boss at the grocery store. He would need a week off starting immediately. As the phone rang, he realized with sudden clarity that regardless of how the performance turned out, something fundamental had already changed. For the first time in their adult lives, the brothers were working toward a shared goal. The music that had long stood as a barrier between them might finally become a bridge. The week that followed was the most intense of the younger brother's life. Each day began before sunrise and stretched well into the night, filled with endless repetitions, corrections, and revelations. True to his word, the conductor had arranged an extraordinary training program. The musical director came for 2 hours each morning, focusing on technique. The composer himself, a stern elderly man with thick glasses and quick, nervous hands, spent afternoons dissecting the emotional architecture of the piece. Here, the composer would say, pointing to a passage, this represents struggle, uncertainty. The notes should sound like questions without answers. Or, this section needs to feel like dawn breaking after a long night. gradual at first, then suddenly brilliant. The younger brother absorbed everything, his mind and fingers working in ways they never had before. The conductor supervised it all, pushing him relentlessly, accepting no excuses for failure. Again, his brother would say after a mistake, from the beginning of the movement, and this time remember to hold the pedal through the entire phrase. Physical pain became a constant companion. The younger brother's fingers cramped, his back ached from hours at the bench. His head pounded with the effort of concentrating so intensely for so long. Yet somehow the discomfort felt right, a necessary part of the transformation taking place. Most surprising was the change in his relationship with the conductor. The lifelong distance between them hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. For the first time they were communicating in a shared language, the language of music. Late one night, after a particularly grueling practice session, the conductor brought 2 glasses of water to the piano. "You've improved," he said, handing one to his younger brother. "More than I expected." Coming from him, this was extraordinary praise. The younger brother accepted it with a tired smile. "Thanks to you and your colleagues," the conductor shook his head. "We're only guiding you. The work is yours." He took a sip of water. "I've been thinking about something the composer said today about your interpretation of the third movement. That I'm too emotional and not technical enough?" Yes, he meant it as criticism, but the conductor hesitated, his gaze distant. "Perhaps that's exactly what this piece needs." The younger brother looked up in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Our regular pianist plays with technical perfection. Every note precisely as written, every dynamic marking exactly observed." The conductor sat beside him on the bench. "But music isn't just about correctness. It's about communication, feeling." He tapped the sheet music. "The composer created these notes, but the performer brings them to life." This philosophical side of his brother was new territory. The younger brother waited, sensing there was more to come. "When you close your eyes and play," the conductor continued, "you sometimes miss notes or blur passages that should be distinct. But you also find something else, something honest." He seemed almost embarrassed by this admission. "It reminds me of why I became a musician in the first place." The moment felt fragile, significant. The younger brother didn't know how to respond without breaking its spell. The conductor cleared his throat. "Anyway, it's late. We should rest. Tomorrow is the first rehearsal with the full orchestra." Sleep didn't come easily that night. The younger brother lay awake, replaying his brother's words while anxiety about the next day churned in his stomach. Playing alone or with instructors was one thing. Facing an entire orchestra of professional musicians was another matter entirely. Morning arrived with gray skies and gentle rain. The brothers drove to the concert hall in silence, each lost in private thoughts. The imposing building, with its grand architecture and historical significance, made the younger brother feel small and unprepared. Backstage, the conductor transformed into his public self, confident, authoritative, slightly distant. He led his brother to the green room, where the orchestra members were gathering. "Everyone," the conductor announced, his voice carrying over the murmur of conversation. "As you know, we've had a pianist problem. This is my brother. He'll be playing with us today." Curious eyes turned to study the newcomer. The younger brother felt their assessment, taking in his casual clothes, his obvious nervousness, his lack of the polished air that marked most classical performers. A violinist with silver-streaked hair approached. "You're really going to play the concerto? After only a week of preparation?" Before he could answer, the conductor stepped in. "He's been working intensively. I wouldn't have brought him if I didn't think he could handle it." This unexpected defense from his usually critical brother gave the younger brother a surge of confidence. Perhaps he really could do this. The orchestra filed onto the stage. The concert hall stretched before them, hundreds of empty seats facing the performance area. Tomorrow night, those seats would be filled with people who had paid to hear excellence. Today was the test to determine if the younger brother would be part of that performance. The grand piano on stage was even more magnificent than his brother's instrument at home. Black and gleaming under the lights, it waited like a slumbering giant. The younger brother approached it with reverence, adjusting the bench as he'd been taught. The conductor took his position, baton ready. "We'll run through the entire piece," he announced to the orchestra. "Play as you would in the actual performance." He looked at his younger brother, their eyes meeting across the short distance that separated them. Something passed between them. Not quite a smile, but a moment of recognition. Then the conductor raised his baton and the orchestra began to play. The opening was orchestral only, giving the younger brother a few precious moments to settle his nerves. He watched his brother conduct, noting how the musicians responded instantly to each subtle gesture. This was a different side of his brother, not the critical perfectionist from their childhood, but a leader who drew extraordinary music from ordinary people. The piano entrance approached. The younger brother positioned his hands, took a deep breath, and as the conductor gave him the cue, he began to play. The first notes came easily, muscle memory taking over. Then came a difficult passage, one that had given him trouble throughout the week. He felt himself tense, his fingers growing rigid with concentration. A wrong note slipped out, then another. Panic rose in his chest. He glanced up and caught his brother watching him, baton never faltering as he directed the orchestra. The conductor gave an almost imperceptible nod, and in that small gesture the younger brother found courage. He closed his eyes. Darkness enveloped him, but instead of fear, he felt liberation. The music wasn't on the page anymore, it was inside him. His fingers found their way across the keys not by sight but by feeling, by the internal map that had been forming all these weeks. The orchestra seemed to sense the change. The strings responded to his playing, matching his emotion with their own. The wind section breathed with his phrases. Even the percussion, usually so precise and unyielding, found flexibility to complement his interpretation. At the center of it all was his brother, conducting both him and the orchestra with subtle guidance, creating space for expression while maintaining the structural integrity of the piece. They were collaborating, communicating without words through the shared medium of music. When the final movement reached its conclusion, the younger brother played the last chord and lifted his hands from the keys. Only then did he open his eyes, returning to the physical world of the concert hall. Silence hung in the air for a long moment. Then the concertmaster, the lead violinist, tapped her bow against her music stand, the classical musician's version of applause during rehearsal. Others joined in, filling the hall with the gentle percussion of approval. The conductor turned to face his orchestra, accepting their response with a nod before addressing them. "We have work to do before tomorrow. The tempo in the second movement needs attention, and the balance between strings and woodwinds in the development section isn't quite right." He paused. "But the piano part stays as it is." The younger brother could hardly believe what he was hearing. He was going to perform, tomorrow night on this stage before a full audience. After dismissing the orchestra for a lunch break, the conductor approached the piano. "Your technique in the allegro section needs refinement," he said, ever the perfectionist. But he hesitated, seeming to struggle with what came next. "You played with your eyes closed." "I always do when it matters most," the younger brother replied. "Like a sorcerer," the conductor said quietly. "What?" "Nothing." His brother straightened his jacket. "We'll work on those technical issues this afternoon. But don't lose," he gestured vaguely. "Don't lose whatever it is that happens when your eyes are closed." The next evening arrived with terrifying speed. The concert hall filled with people in elegant clothes, their murmured conversations creating a gentle hum throughout the space. Backstage, the younger brother paced in the green room, too nervous to sit still. The conductor entered, already dressed in his formal tails, bow tie perfectly centered. "Almost time," he said. "Are you ready?" The younger brother laughed shakily. "Not even slightly. But I'll play anyway." For the first time in memory, his older brother smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Then that makes you a true musician." He placed a hand on his younger brother's shoulder. "Listen, whatever happens out there tonight, whether you play perfectly or miss every other note, I want you to know something." The younger brother waited, heart pounding. "I was wrong," the conductor said simply. "All these years I was wrong about you." Before the younger brother could respond, a stagehand appeared at the door. "2 minutes, maestro," the conductor nodded. "I'll see you out there." He turned to go, then looked back. "Remember, play with your eyes closed. Play like the sorcerer you are." Minutes later, the younger brother walked onto the brightly lit stage. The audience applauded politely as he bowed and took his seat at the piano. His brother stepped onto the podium, baton in hand, and their eyes met once more. In that moment, The younger brother realized that regardless of what happened next, he had already won something precious, recognition from the person whose opinion had shaped his self-image for a lifetime. The music they were about to make together was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. He placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes, and waited for his brother's cue to begin.